Ask, Don't Tell by Ms. Chunks, Chapter 3, Only Doing It Together. Usually, Ochako's quirk is so second nature, she barely even thinks of it. A world where everything is a button that she can press without hesitation. But this time is with Bakugo, and so inevitably this time is different. Ochako has to root through her instincts and do things the hard way. Ochako reaches into her quirk, stretching like a muscle, but not fully bottlenecking the ability as it activates. Slowly, Ochako inflates her power, taking much longer than the on-off way she normally tags people. When she finally feels that she can tie off the end of the balloon, she lets go, and only then does Ochako take her hand off Bakugo's clammy, smelling salt palm. That should do it! Ochako says more to fill the silence than to tell Bakugo something he surely worked out for himself already. Rather than blast off, Bakugo jumps into the air. Ochako is relieved when he soars much higher than someone under the full effects of gravity would do, and comes down nearby in a graceful moon jump that for some reason makes Ochako think it would be a lot of fun at parties. If she went to parties. Accidental sleepovers in Tsuyu's room are about as good as Ochako gets, but she counts them anyway. Hey, it worked! She chirps at Bakugo as he bounces down into an easy landing. Though he's too far away for Ochako to make it out, she can easily imagine the skeptical look Bakugo makes at Ochako's surprise with her own abilities. Bakugo uses a blast to return and moves much faster through the air, pinwheeling like a flaming, juggling torch in a way that turns Ochako's stomach just to watch. He's slower coming down this time, at least by comparison, and makes a very soft thud of landing. Drop it. Release! The pair of words almost feel like they fit together. I want to try something. The only perceptible difference after Ochako releases her quirk is a ruffling of Bakugo's hair, settling lower under the full effects of gravity. I want you to make me float. Then release your quirk just after I blast off. Ochako considers just because Bakugo doesn't like working with others doesn't mean he can't. Though he will avoid or make group work unenjoyable if impressed upon him against his will, this isn't like that. Bakugo wants Ochako there, to work together with her, on ways that their quirks can be turned into something greater than the sum of their parts. It's making him practically cooperative. Ochako takes a moment to process the fact that Bakugo is actually taking the time to lay it out to her. It's surprisingly flattering, so she takes care to reward such efforts by giving what he says careful thought. So, like before. Yeah. Bakugo's eyes rest on Ochako like a weighted bar over her shoulders. It all feels very important and proper, right up until he says, "Stay out of the way and try not to pull any of my clothes off this time." Ochako feels herself going a much brighter shade of pink and decides to intensely devote herself to the fine details of their training. So you want to use the time when my quirk is active to build up speed before you're released. Ochako catches the exact moment that, oh, she actually gets it, dashes across Bakugo's features like a startled flock of deer, scattering parts of his expression without any idea where they're going. Right. Like a slingshot. Ochako lifts her hands and mimes the action, following the imaginary pellet of Bakugo with the tip of a finger until it arcs back down onto the imaginary ground. But what about the landing? That's ground zero, Bakugo replies in an unassuming way that's pretty threatening, a reminder of what he's capable of. Bakugo lazily raises a hand to gesture for the mid-distance, the shells of buildings designed to create as authentic a real-world sandbox for young, unstable heroes to play in. I'll aim for over there, so if you want to stay alive long enough for me to murder you later, then you better keep out of the way. Be careful, Ochako finds herself saying, more out of habit, just to say something, to be positive and friendly in the absence of or in spite of all else. Bakugo looks at her like she just wished him a Merry Christmas in the middle of spring. Piss off! Bakugo goes for Ochako like a hungry dog, eager to take a chunk out of her for the insult of daring to be concerned. I know what I'm doing. Well, obviously. Ochako soothes less carefully than she might have advised herself, remembering too late that to Bakugo the highest form of insult is to be thought of as a cause for concern. It's not a reflection on you. I'm just saying, I don't know, watch out for the unexpected. Something Ochako's currently working on, having spent almost half an hour one-to-one with Bakugo and still not really being totally convinced it's real. I didn't ask you here to lecture me on shit I already know. Bakugo takes about as well to Ochako's attempt to make good as a grizzly bear to being woken by a brass band in the middle of the winter. But all the same, he sticks his hand out like he's asking her to dance. Not that that's ever gonna happen. Shut up and do it already. Ochako considers the potential gains and losses from commenting on Bakugo's familiar blunt instructions, that no-nonsense attitude and lack of manners. Yet she finds herself coming up against Bakugo's hard-driven wall of logic, the act of just getting on with it. Bakugo doesn't wait around or waste time, and part of Ochako knows that if this collaboration between them, a big if, ever turns into something to be used out in the real world, then having manners isn't going to be high on the protocol. However, because this isn't a real battle or even a lesson, and because she can't quite let go without some nod to Bakugo's utterly tactless attitude, Ochako replies with a mildly harangued, "All right, keep your hair on." Bakugo makes another of those disdain-ridden sounds, but leaves it at that, waiting more or less patiently for Ochako to set her fingertips against the tingly hot and slick surface of his palm. Ochako doesn't contemplate it for long, because as soon as Bakugo's weight disappears, so does she, sprinting away from the newly fueled rocket and vaulting over a low barrier to shield behind before takeoff. She knows what happens next. Hearing the roar and feeling the rush of hot air from over the top of the barrier Ochako is crouching behind only affirms of her choice to take cover. Though Ochako whips back up after Bakugo takes off, by the time she finds him in the air, he's already higher than most of the buildings in the training area. He's at a dizzying height, and Ochako is worried enough her stomach has turned inside out. But the thought of Bakugo's fury over not doing what he asked, and the fact that he can't get back down unless she releases her quirk, is incentive enough for Ochako to quickly lay her fingertips to each other with a stealing breath. Release! Ochako watches the change of Bakugo's velocity in the air, the point at which gravity starts turning at his almost straight shot up into the apex of a huge arc. If it were anyone else, Ochako would be absolutely freaking out, sure she was about to be responsible for making a pancake out of a person. To even greater horror, Ochako realizes Bakugo is using explosions to keep building momentum as he falls, or perhaps just remain on trajectory. Fire streams out behind him like a falling star, and there's a moment in Bakugo's descent where Ochako gets lost in the appreciation of exactly how fearless her classmate is and why it makes him so strong. A few buildings over from where they start, Bakugo lands like a meteor. He goes in on the top level of a warehouse-type building, a few floors of quirk-assembled concrete, and the building lights up from inside like a lantern. The boom sounds out like a thunderclap. Ochako is sure she can feel the shake of the ground beneath her feet. She pops up from behind the barrier once more and waits, staring in the direction of Bakugo landed and battling herself about how long she should leave it before going to see if he's okay, knowing how much it'll annoy him if she seems anything less than confident about his return. Ochako hears footsteps before seeing anything. The distinctive thud-thud that somehow manages to sound petulant in its rhythm. Bakugo has a new layer of miscellaneous building dust all over him, giving a grayish tint to his hair. He ruffles his fingers through the thickly sprung mess, shaking out a cloud that catches the waning afternoon light as it cuts between skeletal buildings. The faux warehouse Bakugo hit is still standing in the distance, but only just. Ochako can imagine the force Bakugo must have needed to break his fall, the force needed to cancel out the power of his descent, and realizes just how apt his warning was. Bakugo, better than anyone, understands his own destructive potential, and finding out its limits, how to handle such a force with control, is part of what he's at this school to learn. How did it go? Ochako opts for instead of the more invasive "are you okay" that sits on the edge of her tongue. She's seen enough to know that Bakugo's takeaway from such inquiries is rarely matched to the asker's intention, especially if it's Deku asking, and Ochako isn't Deku, but she's close enough by association to watch her words anyway. Fucking great! Bakugo shakes like a dog, twisting her wrist until an audible click comes out of it. It's not what Ochako's expecting to hear, much less the glut of something like satisfaction pouring off of Bakugo. It's as if he stumbled onto something incredible and is calling it exactly as he sees it. Understandably, Ochako is a little bemused by the rare situation of being around Bakugo while he's genuinely happy about something. So to her discredit says, "Really?" Bakugo tips his head, fingers pulling at the back of his neck like he's testing for another click of his joints. "Why you sound so surprised?" It's slightly defensive at best, and coarsely delivered at worst. Ochako ends up bolting to attention with a misplaced sense of emergency. "I'm not! Well, I am, but just because of this whole thing, you know?" Ochako bounces her forefingers together, a telling fiddle as she feels herself starting to babble. "Us! I mean this!" Bakugo looks at her like she started talking in another language. "It's just not what I expected." Bakugo's eyes narrow again in that figuring out glare that isn't supposed to be angry as it looks. "What did you expect?" I didn't." Ochako tries to explain while seeming to just confuse Bakugo even more. "I never expected any of it, you wanting to do this." Ochako realizes how she sounds, but somehow even that doesn't stop her, adding, "With me. Only we could do this together." Bakugo sounds like this conversation is verging too far into the realm of things he doesn't care about, boring his limited attention span with anything not related to this dynamite he's found with their quirks. "So I don't know why you're acting so shocked." Ochako has a sudden stroke of realization that perfect communication with Bakugo isn't a realistic goal. The world isn't perfect, and sometimes she has to swallow the loss rather than try to make someone like Bakugo understand a concept he's clearly so unfamiliar with. Namely, because it's not just about their quirks, but about Bakugo being Bakugo, and Ochako being Ochako, and this still managing to happen. Ochako doesn't know how to explain getting a chance, an invitation even, to train with Bakugo is not just an everyday occurrence, not for her. Because in plain terms, Bakugo can keep up with the pros and doesn't know what it means to be out of the spotlight. It's just not what he does. Meanwhile, Ochako does her best to put more often than not floats, no pun intended, around the middle. No threat to the power struggle at the top. She counts herself lucky to have so many talented and brilliant friends who will help her keep a pace of the lightning speed development track of their academia. However, there's still no one who will push her like Bakugo, and Ochako is truly excited about the chance to train with him. Never mind, I'm just pleased that you want me to be here. The last part slips out of Ochako a little too freely, eased by the touch of familiarity she's drawn from this training session, as Bakugo himself has named it, and just when she's given up on trying to explain herself. But out of all the things she says, this one is the one that sticks. Bakugo's eyeing Ochako warily as if she was strapped with firecrackers and asking him to hold a lighter over the fuse. "We'll do a few more of these," Bakugo says with a hint of something restless in his tone, like he doesn't have anything to say that could fit together with Ochako's simple expression of being happy to be included. "Then I'll knock you around some." Bakugo's eyes come on and off Ochako as quickly as bouncing off a springboard, and she has a wild thought that he's uncomfortable. They're certainly reaching the upper threshold of how long their conversations last without getting awkward. "Okay?" "Okay," Ochako echoes. "Did I release my quirk in time?" "It was fine," Bakugo says hurriedly, opening and closing his hand, the one she's been touching to activate her quirk like it's starting to itch. Needs another hit of whatever happens when he uses his quirk under the effects of Ochako's own. Bakugo thrusts the hand out between them. "Again!" Ochako reacts instinctively, responding to the palm presented to her by reaching out to fulfill the contract between them before Bakugo's words even sink in. A few hot, literally on fire moments later, Bakugo takes off. Ochako only has a moment to think before releasing her quirk to stop Bakugo from launching himself clear into space. But in that moment, she wonders if this is something she ought to get used to. End of chapter 3.
Penny here. This episode has been sponsored by Anchor. If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. It's free. There's a creation tool that allows you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer, and Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and many more. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place.